What if Donald Trump refuses to leave the White House in January 2029? It sounds impossible. The US Constitution says a president cannot be elected more than twice. Trump has already won in 2016 and 2024, so legally, his presidential clock should end in January 2029. But here's the strange part. Trump himself has repeatedly refused to completely close the door on a third term. In March 2025, Trump said that he was not joking about the possibility and claimed there were methods that could make a third term possible. His allies have discussed potential ways around the constitutional restriction. And although Trump has more recently acknowledged that the law is very strong against a third term,
you put on a Trump 2028 hat. Are you serious about seeking a third term?
Everybody asks me that question, and you know that the law is very strong on that. I'd love to run, but the law is very strong. I get asked by everyone, even tonight, they're screaming at the event.
the political movement behind the idea hasn't simply disappeared. So today, let's examine the real question. Could Trump actually find a path back into the White House after 2028? And if he did, what would that path look like? First, we need to understand the biggest obstacle, the 22nd Amendment. It was ratified in 1951 when President Roosevelt broke the traditional two-term precedent and won 4 elections.
Then, in 1941, Franklin Delano Roosevelt became the first and only president to serve 3 terms. As if that wasn't enough, he won a 4th term.
The amendment states that no person can be elected president more than twice. Trump has already been elected twice, first in 2016 and then in 2024. So under the Constitution as it currently stands, Trump cannot simply put his name on the 2028 presidential ballot and win a 3rd presidential election. There is no legal loophole that magically erases these 2 victories. And that is important because when people say Trump can just run again, that is not what the current constitutional law says. But there is a difference between running directly for president and trying to create a political or legal pathway that would allow Trump to return to the presidency. And that's where things get interesting. One of the most discussed theories involves the vice presidency. Imagine this scenario. Trump doesn't run for the president in 2028. Instead, someone like J.D. Vance runs for president. Vance wins. Trump somehow becomes vice president. Then if the president resigns or leaves the office, Trump becomes president again. Sounds simple, right? But there is just one enormous problem. The 12th Amendment says that anyone constitutionally ineligible to be president is also ineligible to be vice president. And because the 22nd Amendment prevents Trump from being elected president again, so this would also prevent him from becoming vice president. So this is not a clean loophole. In fact, Trump himself later dismissed the idea of running for vice president, calling it too cute.
No, you'd be allowed to do that, but I wouldn't. I wouldn't do it. I think it's too cute. Yeah, I would rule that out because it's too cute. I think the people wouldn't like that. It's too cute. It's not. It wouldn't be right.
But here's why the theory matters. Because it demonstrates something bigger. The debate isn't really about whether one obvious loophole exists. It's about whether Trump's political movement could challenge the constitutional boundaries themselves. There is one completely legal way Trump could theoretically serve another elected term. Change the constitution. That's it. No loophole, no clever legal trick, no interpretation. A constitutional amendment could change the presidential term limit, but this is incredibly difficult. To propose a constitutional amendment, you needed 2/3 vote in both the House and the Senate. Then, 3/4 of the states must ratify it. That means 38 states would have to approve it. Think about what that means. Trump could have Republicans controlling Washington. He could have millions of lawyer supporters. He could have enormous political influence, and still, he would need a massive national coalition to rewrite the Constitution. That is why this is extremely unlikely under normal political conditions. But impossible? No. The Constitution itself provides the mechanism. Now we get to the more fascinating question. Why keep talking about a 3rd term if the Constitution makes it so difficult? Because politics isn't only about what you can legally do. It's also about power, influence, and momentum. Trump has built something unusual in American politics. His political identity isn't simply connected to the Republican Party. For millions of voters, the movement is directly connected to Trump himself, and that creates a problem for the Republican Party. What happens when Trump reaches the end of his 2nd term? Who inherits this movement? J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio, or someone else? Trump has already praised both Vance and Rubio as potential future leaders.
Who likes J.D. Vance? Who likes Marco Rubio. All right. Sounds like a good ticket, JD.
And in 2026, CPAC straw poll, Vance led the field for the 2028 Republican nomination. But here's the strategic advantage of keeping the third term conversation alive. It prevents Trump from immediately becoming a lame duck. If everyone believes Trump is definitely leaving in 2029, Republican politicians naturally begin looking beyond him. They start building their own coalitions, they start raising money, they start competing for the mega base. But if Trump keeps even a small amount of uncertainty around 2028, everyone has to keep looking at him. And according to reporting citing a former senior Trump aide, one reason Trump has continued discussing a third term is to avoid the political irrelevance that normally comes with becoming a lame duck. So perhaps the third term discussion isn't just about 2029. It may also be about controlling 2026, 2027, and 2028. And then there is Steve Bannon. Bannon has openly pushed the idea that Trump could return in 2028. In 2025, he said that he and others were looking at ways to make it happen and suggest there was a plan to circumvent the 22nd Amendment.
Well, he's going to get a third term. So Trump 28, Trump is going to be president 28, and people just ought to get accommodated with that.
So what about the 22nd Amendment?
There's many different alternatives. At the appropriate time, we'll lay out what the plan is, but there's a plan, and President Trump will be the president in 28.
Now, that does not mean such a plan is legally valid. It doesn't mean Trump can actually execute it. And it certainly doesn't mean the Supreme Court would accept it. But politically, it tells us something important. The third term idea isn't just a random internet conspiracy. People inside Trump's political orbit have publicly discussed it. Trump himself has discussed it. And supporters have repeatedly floated different mechanisms. That's why the issue keeps returning. There is another possibility. Trump could attempt to challenge the interpretation of the 22nd Amendment in court. Imagine a scenario where Trump or his allies argue that some unusual constitutional interpretation allows him to appear on the ballot. States could reject the candidacy, other states could accept it, lawsuits could spread across the country. Eventually, the Supreme Court could be forced to decide. This would create an enormous constitutional crisis. But the 22nd Amendment language is remarkably direct. It doesn't say, no person shall serve as president more than twice. It says, no person shall be elected to the office of the president more than twice. That wording is exactly why alternative theories focus so heavily on succession, vice presidency, and technical distinctions between being elected and becoming president. But those theories face serious constitutional objections. So the most realistic conclusion isn't that Trump has discovered a secret legal loophole. He hasn't. The real battle would be over whether America's political institutions would allow an unprecedented attempt to stretch the Constitution. But here's the twist. The biggest possibility may not actually be Trump serving a third term. It could be Trump choosing the person who serves after him. Think about it. If Trump cannot legally run in 2028, he can still endorse a successor. He can campaign for them, he can mobilize his supporters for them, he can define the Republican platform around them. And if that successor wins, Trump could remain one of the most influential political figures in America without sitting in the Oval Office. That may actually be the easier path instead of fighting the Constitution. Trump could control the presidency through political succession, and if the successor is loyal enough, Trump's influence could continue long after January 2029. So, will Donald Trump actually get a third term? Under the Constitution as it stands today, he cannot simply run for president and win a third election. The 22nd Amendment blocks that. Also, the vice presidential theory faces the 12th Amendment, and changing the Constitution would require overwhelming support in Congress and across the states. So if someone tells you Trump has already found a guaranteed loophole, that's misleading. But if someone tells you the third term debate is completely meaningless, that's also wrong. Because Trump has already demonstrated something extraordinary. He can make an idea that once sounded impossible become part of the national political conversation. And as recently as August 2026, Trump acknowledged that the law is very strong against the third term, a significant retreat from his earlier comments. But politics can change, courts can be challenged, constitutions can be amended, and political movements can survive individual leaders. So the real question isn't simply, will Trump be president in 2029? The bigger question is, how much power can Donald Trump retain after he is legally forced to leave the Oval Office? Because if Trump cannot change the Constitution, he may try to change the political system around it. And that is where the real story begins. If you want more impartial analysis on geopolitics, buried history, intelligent and untold market truths where power, money, and secrets collide, then do support our channel. I'm your host Z, and I will see you in the next video.